How are you?
Good afternoon, lady. I'm fine, and you?
Fine. Uh, thank, thank you very much for your collaboration. Let's start first question.
No
Uh,
problem, lady.
what, what is your vision about language teaching and how do you consider it as science, art, or philosophy and why?
Okay, lady. For me, the vision about language teaching, it is something really important nowadays to do it very well, and it is very difficult at the same time. Nobody is used to teach other people, especially the English language. It is something that you need to feel inside you. And as I told you, it is not something easy to do it nowadays. Now, I consider that it is like a mixture of all approaches. It is a science, it is art, and it is philosophy at the same time. But for me, especially, I consider that it is an art. Why? Because it is really important to create my own material to work with my students. So I have to be very like productive, like artistic, like I can take something from here to apply it to my classes, to the context of my students, and so on. So I gotta be like an artist. That's why for me it is more focused on art.
Okay, teacher. Are you focused in one or several methods and approaches for language teaching or not?
Yeah, I'm focused on several methods. There are many methods in English language teaching nowadays, but I don't consider that we have to be focused only in one. I consider that we have to take some apart from all the methods that exist nowadays. For example, sometimes in my classes, I like to apply a nation and a really nation method that is the literal translation, because for me, the students are forced to increase their language, their vocabulary in that case. Sometimes I like to apply the TICS methods. We cannot be apart from technology nowadays. So it is not like we can use only one method in our classes. So we have to use several and several methods that there is nowadays in our worldwide world.
Okay, teacher, very good. What principle should applies in her class, how and why?
Okay, the principles that I can apply in my classes, the first principle for me, and that is the most important one, is to know my students' context. It is now easy to create or to prepare a class in which you have no idea about the context of your students. So I'll give you an example. I had the chance to work in a private and in a public school. Nowadays, I'm working in a public school. The public school economical status of my student is very low. They are students who have no technology in their homes. They have no computers, no internet connection, no smartphones, so they cannot work like using some technology methods, for example. So I have to take into account that I cannot give them a class focus on, for example, the use of social medias, the use of some videos, the use of some audios. Meanwhile, I had the opportunity to work in a private school. So in there, everybody has a smartphone, has a computer, has internet, so they can work easily at home as well. So they were students in which I can speak the whole class in English and they could understand me. But in my public school, I can't do that. So that's the first principle that I have to take into account, to know my students. Then I have to create the conditions for my students. If I know that they have no technology, so I avoid to apply those topics in which they involve the usage of technology in my classes. So I have to take into account that they are poor people, that they have more concerns about different topics like social media, like sports or something like that. And I have the third principle for me is to design the lessons in a high quality for my students. So if I know that they are more interested, for example, in on working, they can prepare a class in which they have to use a vocabulary that they use nowadays in their lives, in their daily lives. So vocabulary that is related to work or to implements that they use in their works, in their different works or something like that. So it's gonna be more meaningful for them.
Good. For what is your main goal of the classes? Is the communication, socioculture, learning to learn, language and culture, awareness or general knowledge, and why?
Okay, the main goal of my classes is for me the general knowledge and the communication. General knowledge because we as official teachers, I work in a public school nowadays with the state, with the government, and we as official teachers, we have to be very focused on the prueba saber. So we know that we have the main goal focus on the prueba saber the students are going to present in 11th grade. And they have to like handle all the skills of the language, especially the grammatical skill, the reading skill, and that's it. So that's why I apply the general knowledge and the communication because it's very important for my students to communicate in English and they can be more contextualized with the usage of the language.
Okay, teacher. 5. Which type of syllabus applies in the classes? It is rather lexical, grammatical, functional, uh, task-based, skill-oriented, other, and why?
Okay, the type of syllabus that I apply in my classes, I think is a mixture, of grammatical and skills oriented. Why? Because as I already said, I work with the government, and the government have developed a series of books, English books, that we have to use to work with our students. The books, obviously, they have some grammatical issues or grammatical topics, but they also are more focused on the development of the four skills that the English language has. So they are books that students can develop the listening part, the speaking part, the reading and the writing part as well. So that's why I think that our syllabus is more focused on grammatical because of the topics we have, and the skills oriented because it is grammatical issues that are oriented through all the skills the English language have.
Okay, teacher. 6. What do you understand of syllabus design and how do you apply it in classes?
Okay, what I understand about a syllabus design is that any program needs the main objective of the studies, of the study plan. So if my objective is that my students speak at the end of the year English, so I have to take into account that, and I have to design all my lessons, in this case, all my syllabus, focus on approaching that goal. So if I have to apply that objective with my students, so I have to take into account all the skills that the English language have, like I already said, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and not only focus on the learning, but in the teaching part as well, because it is something that goes from part to the part. It is something from me as a teacher, and it is something that comes from students as well.
Okay, teacher. 7. What is the syllabus design made of?
Okay, the syllabus design is made of some elements that are really important. The first element is the objectives. As I already said, you cannot design a syllabus if you have no objectives about it. Then a part of the objective is the content that you are going to teach, in this case, in our English language or in our English lessons. Then the methodology that you are going to apply to teach that content. And finally, the evaluation. It is really important to have the assessment of all the knowledge you have impart to your students. So you can take into account those four elements. I repeat, the objectives, the content, the methodology, and the evaluation.
Okay, very good. What knowledge and skill should study program
Okay,
focus on?
in our case that we are English teachers, we are focused on the four skills that the English language has. In our case, speaking, reading, listening, and writing. We cannot prepare some classes focused just on grammar because we already know that the grammar part is just the basis of the language, but it is not enough to communicate in uh, our language, our L2, that is in this case is the English language. So you have to take into account that we as English teachers, we have to be very focused on those four skills. And also on in the components that it is not just to develop the speaking or the listening, but you have to take into account the linguistic communicative context. So you have to take into account the pragmatical part, the linguistic part, and so on.
Okay, which which methods are more feasible, at least initially?
Okay, the methods that are more feasible, for example, we can apply the grammar translation. It is very feasible. As I already said, just to increase the vocabulary of the students. It is a really nice method. But if you are focused, for example, in public education, the audiolingual method, it's a nice method, but it is not initially. Why? Because you know that the government is just directing the students and the teachers to present the prueba saber 11. And the prueba saber doesn't evaluate the listening and the speaking part. It is just more focused on reading and answer some questions about the text that is written in English, and be more focused on grammar that complete this with the verb. The verb is conjugated in present, in past, in future, and so on. So for me, the methods that are more feasible is, for example, the grammar translation, the direct method, that is a very natural method, but the audiolingual method in our public education, it is not like more feasible, and that's it.
Okay, 10. Do you know what the principle of a study plan are?
Where, as far as I know, there are four principles. The first one is that we have to take into account all the knowledge and capacities of our students and our teachers. As I already said, the education nowadays is not only focused like in ancient times on the teacher, that the teacher was the center of the class, but also we have to take into account the students' context and the students themselves. So it is like part and part of both sides. So it is like something like a co-work or a collaborative work that we have to do. The second is that we have to select our an appropriate content. It is not just to teach and that's it. We have to teach something that is related to the context of the students, to take into account what are their likes, their dislikes. If I already know that they have no internet connection, for example, it is going to be very difficult to work on something that uses technology if I know that they have no technologies at home. The third principle is that we have to divide the content into modules or into units that are easy for the students and easy for the teachers. Sometimes we are like just focus on what the book says. And if the book says to me that I have to teach a really advanced grammar topic, let's say report to speech, and if I already know that my students have issues handling or mastering the verb to be, it is something impossible to do it. So I have to take into account that. But there are some teachers that don't take into account that, and they start like giving and giving and providing information, and they don't take into account if the students are really learning about it or not. Yes. And the fourth principle is that we have to take into account that the content was developed like in a specific route. If I know, for example, that I'm going to teach the past simple tense and it involves the usage of the regular and irregular verbs conjugated in past, so I have to program a route in which I have to teach first or in first place the verbs and then the past simple. But there are some people that start like giving all the information or providing all the information about that grammatical topic, and they don't take into account that one of the main issues that students have in that topic is the usage of the regular and irregular verbs. So we have to take into account that we have to develop a root of the content that we are going to teach about.
Excellent, teacher. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, lady, no problem. Anytime you need my help, I'm going to be available for you.
Okay. Bye bye, teacher.
Okay, lady, bye bye. Take care.